This episode is brought to you by Early Innings, an anthology of the first 4 years of the Twin Bill. Featuring over 200 pages of baseball poetry, short stories, essays, interviews, comics, and art, it tells the story of what it means to love baseball today. The Athletic's Tyler Kepner said, like a box of ballpark Cracker Jack, there's a delightful surprise on every page of the Twin Bill's Early Innings. This is a collection to be savored, a loving and lyrical celebration of the art of baseball. Early Innings is available now from 406 Press. This episode is also brought to you by Ben Shahan's Short Relief. It asks the question of what happens when men are not ready to give up that boys' game, the national pastime. In 9 stories, he traces the stories of a minor league pitcher holding on to his last shred of hope for promotion to the show, little leaguers' formative experiences, and a host of men and boys in between. Short Relief is out on 406 Press and available at 406press.com. Welcome to the Twin Bill Podcast. I'm your host, Scott Bolohan. Sometimes it's hard to remember that Babe Ruth was a real person, which I try to remind guests about on my tours of Yankee Stadium. Kelly Bennett's book, Out of the Mouth of Babe, takes quotes and photos from his life, creating a complete image of the great Bambino. Talking about the Babe is one of my favorite things, so this is especially fun for me. Enjoy. Welcome to the podcast, Kelly. How are you doing today?
I'm great. Thanks for having me. Nice to meet you, Scott.
My pleasure. So I always like to start off by asking, where does this idea for the book come from?
I write a poem a day. I am not a poet. I'm a lousy poet. It doesn't matter what kind of poetry, good, bad, or indifferent. St. Patrick's Day 2016 was sort of a horrible time for our country that has not necessarily gotten better. And to brighten the gloom, a friend challenged me because I write picture books. I've been writing picture books forever. And mentor of mine, Sharon Darrow, said, "Why don't you try writing poetry?" And I'm like, "No, I'm not a poet. Never mind." And then another writer, Mary Quattlebaum, said, "Why don't you write poetry?" I'm like, "Nah, don't get me going." And then the middle of the world hit, and a friend said, "Let's do it. If you and I will write a poem a day, only take 7 minutes, because 5 is too short, 10's too long. 7 minutes, a poem a day. If you miss a day, you have to contribute $50 publicly to the campaign that you do not want to win." That was 3,400 days ago or thereabouts.
Wow.
And I have missed 2 excused absences. But doing that, we come up with different prompts. And one day I had a prompt, and the prompt was write a poem based on a nursery rhyme. I know that has absolutely nothing to do with baseball, but the poem that came to mind was The House That Jack Built. And, it's that cumulative poem. This is a mouse that ate the cheese. This is the cat that chased the mouse that ate the cheese. This is the dog that chased the cat that chased the mouse. And I thought, that's well. And also being a baseball person, we know The House That Ruth Built. And I thought, I'm going to write a poem for kids about how a baseball stadium is like that cumulative story. It starts out empty, and I write for children. And I thought, I'm going to write a poem where the stadium starts empty, and then the groundskeepers come, and then the bat boys come, and the bat girls come, and then the ticket takers come, and the ushers come, and then the fans come, and building the tension, and then the players come in, and then it's the big question. And that became this book, The House That Ruth Built. It's a picture book, and if you look at the cover, which I know you all can't see, but go back to the 1923 baseball magazine had Babe Ruth on the cover. And when Yankee Stadium opened up, Babe Ruth's big question all over the news was, he said he'd give anything. And actually he said he'd give a year of his life. And I think he did. If he could get a home run that day, the opening day in Yankee Stadium. And so that is the big story question in The House That Ruth Built. What you and I know that a lot of other people don't know is Susanna Cavelli did the art for the book. It is absolutely glorious. And my idea for the book was to actually let this be the child's first intro to baseball. So we wanted to make sure it was right, but I wanted to include baseball history. So if you look at the book, it has her beautiful sort of Rockwellian-esque art, gorgeous. lots of detail. So there's this lyrical storyline that is easy to read, especially at bedtime when you'd like it to be a short story. Then she's got these pictures with all of these gorgeous details for non readers to enjoy. But there are sideboards, and the sidebars refer to whatever's in the picture. So what I did was, and it seemed like such a simple task, which everything I write seems very simple. I started looking at the picture and then writing lists. For instance, this will be rocks and sticks about the origin of baseball. This will be the rules, how they came about. This will be when the bat boys, the first bat girl, Eddie Bennett, who was the Yankee Stadium bat boy. So I put in the facts. The book is chock full of them, which took me to every Brian Richards, who's the Yankee Museum curator, National Baseball Hall of Fame, Library of Congress, because if this is going to be the definitive book on baseball for kids, I had to make sure everything was right. Well, what I learned quickly was writers embellish. In 1923, everything was in black and white. Sports writers had a lot of columns to fill, and they filled it with whatever they wanted. And also, like every big construction project, even though the blueprints and the architect scheme for Yankee Stadium was published, it immediately changed. So even what's written in the papers, and thank heaven for newspapers who save their archives, it was wrong.
Yeah.
It was sort of like being detectives. Like, I know, Scott, you're familiar with Brian Richards. The colors for the book, everything's in black and white. What the heck color is it? Well, if you go online for the original Yankee Stadium seats, they're blue.
Are they really? I would have thought they would be
Yes.
green. Really?
Well, they are green. And here was Brian. We were zooming in on the on a little
Yeah, yeah,
microscope,
yeah.
looking at it, saying, well, if you look underneath that blue, you can see the green paint under there. They almost immediately changed the paint. So it was really this delightful blend of a lot of baseball people doing some serious detective work and so much fun. That is where it started.
And then I assume that Out of the Mouth of Babe is just a natural progression from the house that Ruth built. Were you just overwhelmed with all this research at this point, and you're just like, I got books?
I've read everything. I mean, that, as long winded as that story was, the research was 10 times longer.
Oh, I'm
The
sure.
lovely thing that happened was I was trying to get a photo of Babe Ruth when he was young. And that is what led me to his family. Tom Stevens is Babe Ruth's grandson, and Brent Stevens, Babe Ruth's great grandson, and the Babe Ruth Birthplace Museum in Baltimore. There is a picture of Babe Ruth, maybe 1.5 to 2 years old, in a dress like girls, everybody, girls and boys all
Yep.
wore their
Yep.
dresses back then. You know, the whole thing about not getting your long pants until you were older. Brent Stevens led me to the Babe Ruth Birthplace Museum for that photo. And then I did acquire the photo from them. The house that Ruth built, though it features Babe Ruth's home run, it is not about Babe Ruth. But he figured so prominently, I kept coming up with all of these phenomenal things Babe Ruth said and did as a person. And I was collecting all of this, and Tom Stevens and Brent also vetted the book along with everybody else. Babe Ruth left all of his baseball possessions to the National Baseball Hall of Fame in his will. His family does not have any of those $1 million baseballs, doesn't have any of that $1 billion bat. Thank you. Yankee Stadium has the bat right now on loan. He doesn't have that. They didn't even, and what I didn't know at the time, they had a lot of photos, the Ruth Stevens family collection, and Julia Stevens was Babe's adopted daughter. Stevens is her married name. He also had Dorothy, his other daughter. They both have families. They have photos. So I said to Brent one day, very innocently, what do you think about a really simple little book of inspirational quotes that Babe said about not just baseball, but about life, about hitting, pitching, striking out, coming back, swinging, something that makes this man 100 years later still the most famous baseball player and arguably a world renowned superhero. What gave him that longevity? What did he have that other people don't? So let's put those quotes together with photos from your family's collection and just do a little coffee table book. And that became Out of the Mouth of Babe. If you've seen it, it is anything but little and simple coffee table book. I just thought it would be sort of a fun thing and people
Right.
would really enjoy it and they would flip through and have a great time.
It is not just simply quotes on a blank page. It is so much more than that. There's a concise biography in there, really kind of like. So I was going to ask you, how do you, as you're coming up with these quotes? Let's first of all, so many questions. Let's
This
start
is so
with the
fun.
quotes. Let's start with the quotes. How did you find these quotes? How did you narrow down which ones you wanted to use? What was that process like for you?
Oh my gosh. Well, Scott, in the book, it's not just quotes by Babe. Like there are about 85 big, bold quotes by Babe that Babe Ruth, there are more books written about Babe Ruth than any other player. And they are still
Oh yeah.
coming up with more books and more books and more books. And I had stacks of books out on interlibrary loan. Not only did I read books looking for interesting baseball snippets that I thought little trivia nuggets that would be great in the first book, but then I kept reading more about Babe. And as I do, and I hope all writers do, I keep a notebook of quotes that I liked. Along with them, thank you very much. I keep a long bibliography. So next to the quote, I'd put like book one, and I had a big bibliography list. I really didn't think I was going to do anything with them. I mean, I had no intention of writing a book about Babe Ruth, but what we did was we started with the Ruth Stevens family collection. Now, Brent Stevens is Babe Ruth's great grandson. His partner at Babe Ruth Central, which is a website, the family website, is Stu Dressler. Stu is the tech guy and puts it all together. So, what we started with was the Ruth Stevens photos. What I didn't know at the time was photos before 1928 or 29. And I'm really vague about that because the copyright laws changed in the middle of writing this book, are in the public domain. That means if you find it, you can use it. However, the ones that you find online might not be very high definition, and also they might have been watermarked by another big company already. So you really have to watch your photos. And then the thing that I didn't know is the person in the photo does not own the photo.
Right.
It's the person who took the photo. So you
Mm-hmm.
might be as handsome as possible in a photo, but you don't have permission to use it unless the photographer gives it to you. So Babe Ruth, why that's significant? Because his family was given a lot of really fabulous photos that, in order for us to put them in the book, we had to track down the photographer who owned the rights to that picture. So first, Brent and Stu and I all went through and laid out photos that we liked, and we eliminated ones that you saw everywhere.
Because I was going to say, I have seen, for example, the Babe bows out, the famous one where it's shot behind of him at Yankee Stadium, the final appearance, leaning on Bob Feller's bat. That's in there. I've seen five, six, seven, eight of these photos before. A lot of these I have not seen.
Good. I love it.
Including the fantastic cover where he's back at the exhibition game at Yankee Stadium. It looks like he's literally shouting out something. Yeah, yeah. It was
And
fantastic.
he was heckling from the dugout at an old timers game. We wanted to show Babe. We do have quite a few live action shots in there. Okay, this is the writer nerd. I'm first and foremost a writer. I had hundreds of pictures laid out. We sort of put them in columns that said, this is Babe in action, this is Babe with teammates, this is Babe doing things that you wouldn't expect him to do. Like, for instance, well, there is a photo of him when he was on set with Gary Cooper and they're riding a bicycle and they're on the handlebars. That was on the set of, no, Pride of the Yankees. And that was on the set of the movie, zooming around. And then we also have some stills from movies. What we wanted to do was we wanted to show him with family, the private Babe, and also always going back to what made him different, what made him special. And the biggest thing is Babe said yes to everything. And so when we were looking at photos, it's like, is in this picture, is he saying yes? And that was how we chose them.
That's a really interesting perspective. There's a lot of great photos. Him on bikes, him with a log over his shoulder at the home plate farm in Massachusetts. My favorite one. And this is a good example of him saying yes. And I think something that really comes back to his childhood. There's a photo of him with just a pile of baseballs and all the boxes on the floor that he's taken and he's just signing all of these baseballs, which today now, they're $100,000 baseballs. But back then, he would sign for everybody. He very much, I think, and maybe correct me if I'm wrong, I think this kind of goes back to his childhood where he viewed children very specially, and he really wanted to do whatever he could for them, including here's an autographed baseball from me, and he would say no to nobody. It sounded like.
You're exactly right. Babe Ruth, and a lot of people don't know this. First of all, he was a year and a day younger than he ever thought he was until he was 39, until he needed to go get a passport to go to Japan. So everything I say is a year younger. He grew up poor in Baltimore. His mom, Katie, had 8 children in a very short time, 2 sets of twins. 8 children, 2 sets of twins. That is pregnant 6 times. Pregnant 6 times. Babe was the oldest. His younger daughter, Mamie, was the youngest, and those are the only 2 surviving children. His mom, this little teeny 4-foot something, Katie, was dealing with all of that. His dad was a barkeep. And so he ran wild in the streets of in Baltimore, in an area that is close to the waterfront that they called Pigtown. They called it Pigtown because they would actually run the pigs through the street from the ships to the trains to get them to the stockyard. They said that if you were lucky on a Sunday morning, you could reach out your basement window and scoop up a pig. But what's really cool is the streets there. You guys, you should go to, and this is a total commercial, but go to Babe Ruth Birthplace Museum if you're in Baltimore. It's right by Camden Yard. The streets are still cobbled. And his house where he was born, his grandparents' house, is now the Babe Ruth Museum. He was born in the 2nd floor. You're standing in the house he was born in, but you're also walking on the streets where he walked and played baseball. And it's chilling. About 2 blocks away was where the free blacks lived, which is hugely instrumental in Babe's upbringing because he was not a prejudiced guy. They say that if you did not play baseball with Babe, man, woman, black, white, whoever you were, it was your own fault because he would play baseball with everybody. He also would stop on the street and play baseball with the kids. There's a little guy called Little Ray Kelly. When he was 3 years old, he was on his way, and little Ray was out on the street playing baseball with his dad, and Babe looked and said, "Hey, for a 3-year-old, he has got an arm. He is really good. Bring him to the game." They gave the dad tickets, took him to the game, and little Ray became Babe Ruth's mascot. He had his cute little pinstripe that matched Babe's before the games. Now you guys imagine this. This is a Major League Baseball player. Prior to the game, would go out while the fans were in the stands and goof around with little Ray Kelly. Put him on his shoulders. They'd hit balls to each other. He'd play with the kids in the stand. They also said that so many games ran longer because the fans would run out on the field to get Babe Ruth's autograph, and he'd give it to them. They'd also run out on the field and steal the bases so he couldn't get a home run or so somebody couldn't get it out. And they said a lot of games were called, especially barnstorming games, because the kids would steal the balls.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I know I went way off topic, but he loved kids. Let's go back a little bit. So that little boy that I talked to you about, Katie's little boy, was naughty. He ran the streets. Today he would probably be diagnosed with some sort of impulse control, ADD.
For sure. Yeah.
He didn't need much sleep. He was running wild. Now, the story goes either the police came to Babe Ruth's parents and said, "You need to put him in a reformatory because he's in bad way," or it was their choice, and we're not sure. But whatever, when he was, they thought 8, but actually 7, they put him on a trolley to St. Mary's School for Incorrigible Delinquent Orphaned Boys. Suddenly he went from his little neighborhood that he had never left to living with 800 boys in arguably a reform school. And they were there until they were 21 because that was when you were declared an adult. So from the time he thought 8, actually 7, He was living with 800 boys, and they were in there. The Xavier and brothers wanted those boys to leave there with a trade. So they would get up at 6 in the morning, they'd go to mass, and then they would go to class, and then they would go out into the community and work and learn a trade. And Babe Ruth was working to be a tailor. His wife, years later, Claire, his second wife, said that even after he was a famous baseball player, he still sewed on his own buttons and would be fixing collars. And also in the afternoon, those boys played sports, and baseball was the number one sport. And baseball really saved him. And it was, he said, because of this brother Matthias, one of the Xavier brothers, 6'6", monster man. He would go out in the field with the boys and he would hit fungos, where you throw the ball up and you whack it as hard as you can. And Babe said, this quote is in the book, that he saw him hit a fungo and said, that's what I want to do. I want to hit a ball like that.
When you look at his upbringing and the times and everything, there's no reason for us to still be talking about him today. But he was just so special. You look at what had happened in his life, where he was. Someone like that doesn't get books written about him 100 years after he was playing. It's truly incredible. And I think that one of the interesting things about this book is using the quotes. When I give the Yankee Stadium tours, I always talk about him in this sort of mythical way because he is larger than life. What was Babe the person like? How would you describe George Ruth, the actual person, not the Babe?
He was really smart. And I think that people do not give him credit for how smart he was. And it was funny because before going to St. Mary's, he did not go to much school. And what I'm understanding is he sort of played hooky a lot. So he really didn't go to a lot of school. When he got to St. Mary's, he was put into classes with the kids that were younger than him to learn to read and write. And it embarrassed him. It embarrassed him a lot. And that sort of stuck with him. Like, even with this big, huge bravado of a man, inside he had that feeling that maybe he wasn't as good as other people. And so he always tried a little harder. He was a huge reader and he was a people pleaser. His daughter, Julia, said, and I'm going to go back again, because in St. Mary's, they did not eat well. Sunday was the big day, and on Sunday they got weenies. Often, as boys do, they would have traded him out for something else during the week. His daughter said he was always hungry. When he was older, he always was hungry. So I think that upbringing had him a craving inside to be a people pleaser, to be the best that he could be, to make something of himself. And I think it came from those early days where, when you're one of 800, it would have been really easy to get lost. Fortunately, he was also big and strong and very coordinated, very young. So when he went out as a little kid, and I say he played sports in the field, he very quickly went as an 8-year-old to playing with 10-year-olds, and then as a 10-year-old playing with 12 and 15-year-olds. And when he was 16, he was so coordinated that he was playing with adults. So I think that was a huge advantage. But I'll tell you something else. He grew up in a time before TV, before radio, before airplanes. The teams traveled by train. They were on the road for a long time, and they had a lot of quiet time. Baseball was America's game, and newspapers covered baseball. And those writers traveled with the team. They had a lot of time to talk to Babe, to get to know him, and to write about him. Athletes today, you don't get that. They might be wonderful people, but we don't really get to know them on the person level the way we got to know Babe and Yogi Berra, even Shoeless Joe Jackson. The reporters were out there with the team, and they got to know those players, and then we got to know them.
I think that's a big reason why Babe has become this legendary figure. And a lot of it's through, if you want to talk about Christy Walsh, there's a big part of that too, but it is a symbiotic relationship with the media where they need Babe Ruth needs them, and they work well together. Does it sort of create this mythical figure? Yeah, but I also think it lets you actually learn the person. I think about athletes today. There's no Babe Ruth out there. Yeah, sure, Shohei Ohtani, and yes, there's the whole language barrier. We don't really know Shohei Ohtani. I don't feel like I really know Aaron Judge. I don't think I really know any of these. And maybe you got to go back to a Muhammad Ali, who I think has a lot in common with the Babe, and just sort of like their their view on the world and just the joyfulness. There's something there. Michael Jordan, we didn't really know Michael Jordan. It's like it's a very unique case with the Babe, I think.
Shaquille O'Neal we know him. Jane Levy, who she is out with a new book right now called I Want to Be the Commissioner, or If I Were the Commissioner,
Yeah.
talking about what she would do for baseball now. And she makes a point talking about who was the last baseball player who actually stayed after to sign balls. Who was the and she was talking about the players who would just sort of hang out. Well, now, if you think about it, and this goes back to the original Yankee Stadium, the way the fans exited the stadium was directly across the center of the field.
Mm-hmm.
That is such a metaphor for the closeness that players had and that fans had with the players back then. They say that the reason umpires wear suits is because if the fans exiting the game knew that a person was an umpire, they would have swarmed him for all of the bad calls that they didn't like. So the umpires actually wore suits so they could make a fast exit. Imagine it now.
I was a kid and I used to be able to go right up to the dugout for batting practice. Right, and now at Yankee Stadium, there's the moat with the Legends seats there. There's the netting, and yes, there should probably be netting. I think that's
We
a good
like the
thing.
netting.
The netting is good, but when I was a kid, you go right behind the dugout, and they would roll baseballs to you. You could hear them talk, you could get close, and it's that closeness that's gone now. And I think the Babe, especially when he barnstormed, I think one of the things you got to remember, there was no baseball west of no major league baseball west of St. Louis, and so he brought baseball to the country, to these people, and they wanted to get close to him, and he would let them in a way that you just don't see at all today, or really ever again in that same kind of way, where he seemed to feed off of this role as the ambassador, role as the star. He just wanted to make people happy, I think.
Absolutely. I am not going to say, I think there are players playing now today that crave that sort of closeness. We won't necessarily know about it because they aren't allowed the minutes in the media. Everything comes in sound bites. And I will not put the blame on the players, because you see a lot of them. Like, I was just watching where my son, when he was young, now my son's old, but my son, when he was a teenager, we lived in Texas, and he used to go down as a baseball player to the Astros, and the Astros players would come out and play baseball with them.
Mm-hmm.
And they had such a great time. And you'll see now, every now and again on sports, you'll see where players are out there playing with different kids.
Yeah.
Doing things like, you're a big baseball players, especially, but I think anybody in any sport, you are a big kid at heart. If you're out there playing baseball professionally, you like the game. You're a kid. That old Wheaties commercial where the boxes where they start out 2 years old and they get bigger, 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 bigger. Inside of all of those players is that little kid who loves the game.
I describe the Babe a lot of times on my tour as just kind of a big kid that had everything in the world. And I think that there is perhaps something to that. But I think that, coming back to your point about his intelligence, I think maybe that's an incomplete description of him, because there's a lot more to the Babe. I mean, my favorite quote in the book, it's funny. He can be a funny guy. He says, "Only one superstition: I touch all the bases when I hit a home run." That's a great, funny, clever quote. There's a lot more to him, and I think especially as you get toward the end of his career and life, he wants to stay in baseball. He wants to be a part of it. He loves baseball. He wants to manage, and I think maybe it's because of this big kid in him. No one wants to give him the chance, and it really devastates him. It really, really bothers him, where he put his whole life into baseball, and they won't give him anything back when he just wants to help it and continue on and have this sort of level of respect that he has deservedly earned in the game, and no one will do it for him. I know he's not a perfect guy. And I think that, we can't sit here and pretend that everything the Babe did was absolutely perfect at all times, and there's no reason why he wouldn't be given those opportunities. But it really did get to him, and it really did bother him. How important was this to him, especially at the end of his life here? It seems like that was a huge aspect to him.
For a person who was used to being with 800 kids, all for 10 years for sure, to go to having to be so isolated before games, when he had free time, he was wild and he was out and he didn't require much sleep and he wanted to go where the fun was. So that, and he had a good time. And that was his persona. But you do not play professional ball and drink or eat or not work out. Like they say that Babe Ruth hated working out, but he was also the first athlete to hire a personal trainer. And that photo you alluded to that's in the book of him with a log on his shoulder and home plate farm, 22 is arguably his worst season.
Oh, yeah.
At the sports writers dinner, he was lambasted, and the story about this is in the book. What we did with the book was we sort of decided to make a club sandwich of it for those of you who are not seeing it. So the chapters, the biographical chapters, Babe in Boston and full of beans when he was with the Red Sox, and Babe taking the bite out of the Big Apple when he was with the Yankees, are sort of the pieces of bread, and the photos and quotes are the fillings and the jam and the relish that you'll enjoy in between. But he had the reputation because it was good news. It was good story of not being serious. He was serious. When he went to Home Plate Farm, he worked out. He got back into shape and came back in 2023 fighting strong. What did he do that first day? Spoiler alert for the house that we built. He hit the first home run. So he did it, but it was fun. He wanted to manage. Now, if you go to his Japan tour, he was the manager of the Japan tour. And the Japan tour was a very difficult challenge. Logistically, moving the team around to lots of different climates, to lots of different hotels, to lots of different stadiums, and all of those big league player personalities. Christy Walsh organized the tour, but the players on there have publicly said what a great manager he was. So when he did get the chance to manage, the barnstorming trips, he had barnstorming tours, but he managed the barnstorming tours. He didn't set up the dates for them, but he managed the playing. Those players, and not only that, but people wanted to see him hit, and they said the only thing better than watching Babe hit was strike out. He gave everybody what he wanted, but also at that time, baseball players didn't make any money. Babe Ruth made money. Lou Gehrig, he was making nothing. He wasn't making a living wage for a year. But by going with Babe Ruth on the barnstorming tours, those players would make 2 or 3 or 4 times their salary that they earned from playing baseball. So barnstorming after the series gave them money. They loved it and they hammed it up. And even Lou Gehrig, who, if you all have studied anything about him, he was a shy guy. He didn't like to talk, very quiet. He'd be out there hamming it up because that's what he did. They also said that Gehrig would temper Ruth a little bit too, because when they were on barnstorming tours, it was sort of like Babe Ruth was his big brother, and he was going to be a little bit better to show Lou. And maybe Lou was a little bit naughtier because Babe brought it out in him. But I got off topic because we're going to talk about Babe as the manager. When we were writing Out of the Mouth of Babe, the book is done. We are proofreading the final copy to go to press when Major League Baseball integrated Negro League's stats. I can tell you, as a writer with a project almost finished, I groaned. That meant that we had to go back through 200 pages of copy to check every single stat that is in this book. But as a fan of baseball, I was frankly disappointed that Negro Leagues were not acknowledged a lot earlier. I was very pleased. It also gave Brent and I and Stu Dressler and Tom Stevens, Babe Ruth's grandson, an opportunity to really think about who Babe was and with the integrated stats and how he felt. What's very cool is Brent had a chance to meet Josh Gibson's grandson at a wedding or what have you sometime. Now, Josh Gibson, for all of you who don't know it, now if you look at who hit more home runs than anybody, if you look at the records, it is Josh Gibson. They called him the Black Babe Ruth. They also called Babe Ruth the white Josh Gibson. The two, they did not play together and they were never on the same field together. There is an age difference. but there's huge comparison between the two of them. When Brent met Josh's great grandson, they thought, wouldn't it be cool? What if our grandfathers really actually had played together? What would it have been like? And it sort of opened up a discussion about why Babe did not become a manager. The baseball commissioner, Kennesaw Mountain Landis, who was the baseball commissioner when Babe was playing, was not a proponent of integrated baseball. As a matter of fact, if you look, Jackie Robinson got into Major League Baseball only after Kennesaw Landis was no longer the commissioner. Babe Ruth would play baseball with anybody. Honus Wagner, one of the greatest players. Pop Lloyd, Babe Ruth thought he was one of the best players of all time. He would have integrated baseball. And if you look, there were several opportunities where Babe almost became a manager and then miraculously they would sort of disappear. And the belief of Bill Jinkerson, who is a huge Babe Ruth historian, he's done a lot of research on this and he wrote this really good essay. And we do allude to this in the book about perhaps the reason that Babe never did get to become a manager, aside from that little bit with the Braves at the end of his career, where he really did not, he joined the team and he was going to be a player manager. That was what, but really it was to be a fan magnet. And he did not get the opportunity to manage. And you're correct. That was a huge disappointment of his life. He wanted that phone call. He wanted to get to be a manager. If he had lived a couple years longer, maybe he would have, if Landis had checked out before he did, maybe he would have had his chance.
So I guess this is kind of the big question. He was playing 100 years ago. He died, 75 years ago?
Yeah.
Why does he still have this grip on us? Do you have any feel for that?
Well, we love our legends. We love our myths. We love our legends. He was, as I put in the book, I'm going to read one little inch that I think is it. Why Babe? Before Superman, Batman, the Green Lantern, or even Buck Rogers, there was George Herman Babe Ruth, part superhero, part folk legend, full-on action figure. And Jumpin' Joe Dugan. You guys, listeners, when you go through the book, along with quotes from Babe, there are a lot of quotes from players that he played with saying how great he was, saying how generous he was, saying what a team player he was. Jumpin' Joe Dugan said to understand him, you had to understand that he wasn't human. And I think that is why Babe is still here, because he is like Superman, like the Green Lantern. He was a superhero action figure. And we love to embrace our myths and we love to embrace our legends. And he gives us something to strive for and something hopeful. It's a benchmark it's like Superman. You either want to whack him in the heel and find his kryptonite. It's always, who can you pit him against? And he's coming out on top, and Babe comes out on top.
I think I've told this story on the podcast before, but when I give the tours at the museum, a lot of times we get to pull out a Babe Ruth bat from 1923, and people get to hold it, and they have to put on the latex gloves to hold it. And I have kids, I have adults, older adults, all ages. They hold this bat, and at the end they'll ask, "Can I keep these gloves?" Because they touched Babe Ruth's bat. And it just kind of speaks to the power that he still has. And I think it's that little bit of connection that this figure who has come to define baseball and America, to have that little connection with him, I think is still so powerful for so many people. As you have an event tonight, and I'm sure you're going to get people coming out there who are still moved by Babe Ruth and have Babe Ruth stories, whether or not they came anywhere near to seeing him play. It still matters to this day.
Isn't it? I mean, it is amazing. It is amazing and it's wonderful. What I get you, I mean, like I told you, when I went to his birthplace, I had chills standing in that house. At Yankee Stadium, what you all don't know, right now we have the new Yankee Stadium. And I know you hear stories about the difference between the old and the new and the old and the new, and blah, blah, blah. But what a lot of people don't know is right across the street from the new Yankee Stadium is where the old Yankee Stadium is. And there is a baseball diamond out there. And that baseball diamond is the exact same place that Babe Ruth and Joe DiMaggio and Lou Gehrig and all of those players played. And it's like their DNA, his DNA wafts up at you. Holding that bat, you know, some Babe molecules get on you. Maybe a little bit of Babe gets into us thinking that we can be better. You know, that whole Ruth, I mean, come on, he's got a word in the dictionary, Ruthian.
Mm-hmm.
He is, don't all of us want to be a little better than we can be? And I think that's, he maybe inspires in all of us the idea that we can. And then it doesn't hurt that players are still today trying to break records. It took Shohei Ohtani 100 years to break Babe Ruth's two-way player record.
This has been phenomenal. I've thoroughly enjoyed this talk. The book is fantastic. It's a beautiful book, and it really it gives you that connection with the Babe that I think that we're all after as baseball fans, as Americans. It's really special. I hope you have more treasure troves of Babe stuff and Yankee stuff you can keep writing, but it's really, really great. And I'm so glad you were able to join us today.
Well, there is nothing more fun than talking baseball or talking Babe. Thanks for having me, Scott. I really appreciated it.
That was Kelly Bennett. Her book, Out of the Mouth of Babe, Babe Ruth on Life, Pitching, Hitting, Striking Out, and Coming Back Swinging, is out now. We talk to people in and around baseball literature every week on the podcast and publish around 50 writers every year in the Twin Bill Literary Journal. Until next time,